Hello and welcome to the Bucket Lister podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hi everyone and welcome to the Bucket List podcast, the podcast about adventurous people for adventurous people. And I'm really happy today to be chatting with a chap called Nick Butter. Hi, Nick.
Hello. Thank you for having me on.
No problems at all. So most of my audience probably won't have heard of you, Nick. And I'm sat with your book in front of me, which is Nick Butter Running the World, 196 marathons in 674 days.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, so the aim was to try and set the world record, be the first person to run a marathon in every country in the world. And it was to raise money for prostate cancer UK specifically, the charity. And that all came off the back of meeting a brilliant chap called Kevin Webber when he and I were two camp mates in our team of 8, or I suppose our tent of 8 people out in the Sahara Desert while we're running the Marathon des Sables. Marathon des Sables is a 7-day race through the Sahara Desert in Morocco, 50-degree heats, huge sand dunes, pretty grueling. And he and I were a couple of mates of 8 of us in this tent, and we just really got on. He was 49-50 at the time, but he kind of expressed this message to me that he had terminal prostate cancer, and that there was this disconnect between the fact that he said he was dying and was given as little as 2 years to live, and then the disconnect between the fact that he was incredibly happy, and there was a disconnect with the way in which he was behaving. And I thought, well, what's up with this guy? And I realized after a few more conversations with him that he just understood the value of life, and he was just literally going for it, full steam ahead, cramming in as much as he could before his time was up. And that's, as morbid as it sounds, that's not how he saw it. He just saw it as the best possible time he could. And he still is. And given 2 years to live, I then wanted to do something for him, to raise some money for the charity, to kind of elevate prostate cancer's awareness as well, because that's not talked about enough. Did some research, and then I thought, well, yeah, what can I do to do something a bit different, and that's going to be long enough as well. It needed to be long enough in duration in order to attract attention to get some donations in. We set a target, £250,000, and before long, I managed to stumble across my eventual project, which was Googling, has anybody run a marathon in every country in the world? And the answer was no. And so that seemed like a very surprising thing. I thought, well, we've put people on the moon. How on earth have we not run a marathon in every country? I now realise why. It's quite difficult. And so, yeah, Kev kind of sparked that dream, and then it took a couple of years to get to the start line. And I set off on January the 6th, 2018. And amazingly, by many miracles, we got to the finish line too.
Oh, it's just an amazing challenge. And, the fact that, we're called the Bucket List podcast, and that's what he was trying to achieve. He was trying to tick things off his bucket list with a terminal illness. And, it's one of the things with, we get people say to us all the time, the bucket list company, that's really morbid, thinking about things you're going to do before you die. But that's not necessarily what it's about at all. It's about getting the things done you want to do.
Yeah. That's
when
very
you want to do them.
Yeah, because the bucket list, that's not the connotations that I have. It's not morbid in the slightest. If anything, it's a celebratory, like, wake up everybody, your time, you've got to do stuff now. Yeah. And that's exactly what Kev was saying. He said to me, don't wait for a diagnosis. He said, don't wait for something to happen in your life to give you a kick up the backside to actually follow your dreams before it's too late. And so now I speak with a lot of schools, and I talk about it a lot in my book, actually, about the fact that we often don't necessarily live with the intent that we should do. And we all are guilty, me included still, of going to bed at night and assuming that tomorrow is going to be another day. And unfortunately, that's not how life works. It doesn't happen like that for everybody. If we're lucky, we'll get to old age and we'll have had many great memories. But even if we get there, I think many of us, if not most of us, potentially don't follow the dreams that we have in our heart because of doubts, fear, many reasons that probably are unwarranted. And actually, if we just stuck our neck out a bit, we would probably achieve a bit more. So that was kind of the message that Kev gave to me, and fortunately we managed to see it through.
So you were already a really keen runner then before you decided, before you stumbled across this, this challenge, because entering the Marathon des Sables is not something that a jogger goes and enters, is it?
No, that's true. Actually, no, I've done before the trip. I'd done I think it was about 450 marathons and a fair few decent ultras, and I was in that space of training hard, big distances to do big races like MDS and those kind of things. So yeah, long distance was my thing. Very slow and steady. I'm not a very good runner by any means. More just kind of plodding away and enjoying the process, really.
Okay, so how do you cope with the logistics of organising a challenge like this? I mean, most people, they'll go, most people book us to say, I want to do Kilimanjaro, so I'm going to book it with you, and we organise all the logistics for them, and that's what we do for a job. But how do you go about organising a challenge of every country, in the world?
Slowly, and through fumbling through many problems after many problems. I mean, when I stumbled upon that, I didn't really know how many countries there were in the world, what Guinness World Records regulations would be like. Having done stuff with them in the past, I knew that it was going to be difficult. Just on that sheer, if you think about it you'll know from the logistics, there's countless things that you can think of, and then you plan around them. And then you realize that you've probably only seen a tiny percentage of the stuff. And then, especially for the world, we had everything from juggling visas and passports and safety and security and climates and flights and cancellations and overland journeys. And is it even possible to get to all the countries? Are there flights? What if flight companies go bankrupt? And I think we had something like 20 airlines go bankrupt in those 2 years, and over 60 flights that were cancelled. I got through 9 passports. We did 450 odd flights, and then all the stuff that goes wrong in the middle that you then have to adjust, because it's over such a long period of time, whereby if you had a normal smaller mission, let's say you were doing something for a month or even 3 months, there's still a decent time, but most of the time the people that are working with you will stick with you during that trip because they know it means so much. But over 2 years, there's all the volunteers and all of the paid team, they still had lives. And I was halfway around the world in a different time zone, in a completely different bubble. And so they were having to tap in to help me. And so, I mean, the logistics was started very slowly. I started putting the route together and understanding the countries, and then I started to build a team that needed to be involved. And that then grew to psychologists, nutritionists, having a proper project manager on the team. I've got my parents involved. They were really heavily involved in helping with the getting me from A to B to C to D. And I challenge anybody to try and link up all of the Pacific Islands within 3 weeks. It's just so difficult because the airlines are not simple, and you end up on 4 or 5 connections between each island, and that's not exaggerating. And then you go to the next level of understanding how much everything costs, because that's such a big challenge. We got that very wrong because it's not been done before, and there was a lot of things that we needed to take into consideration. And I started to realize little stuff like if I bought a Twix or a Mars bar on a plane every journey, that's going to cost me like $2,000. And so everything I had to be really careful over that time that we made sure we had enough money and we could finish the journey, and that I was healthy and having enough food in me. And it's just endless. And eventually in this war room that we called it, which I talk about in the book, which is eventually turned into the yellow room because of all the yellow Post-its, we put that map on the wall and we worked out everything, and we felt like we knew what we were doing. And of course, we didn't really know what we were doing. We just fumbled through from one day to the next. And unfortunately, it was with the kindness of other people around me that we made it happen.
Because I suppose, there are some countries that if you've got that stamp in your passport, they won't let you go into another country. And you probably don't know that when you sit there start the planning for this.
No, and it also evolves. So even if we have a definitive answer on day 1, by day 500, it could be completely different. There could be new countries. There could be wars breaking out, and there were riots, all sorts of protests, airline strikes, you name it. And so it could continually evolving, kind of shifting landscape, which was quite difficult to judge. And the passports thing, juggling a couple of passports is hard enough. And then you add in the fatigue, the amount of times I turned up at immigration and they ask you where you've come in from. And I genuinely couldn't answer them. I was so exhausted, and I didn't know which passport to give them. I didn't know where I'd just been. I looked incredibly dodgy. And yeah, maybe I still do. I don't know. But it was quite nice to go through and fill the passports up. But fortunately, I had a brilliant company called Universal Visas who were volunteering their time and their energy and their efforts. And amazingly, about 6 months before we left, they came on board, and they stayed on board right till the very end. And I have to say that their support was unbelievably high. Like, the quality was high, but not just forget about the quality and what they did, but just to stick with me through everything, through, you know, sending my passports off to multiple countries and speaking to literally every country in the world. They did a tremendous job. And every week I was half expecting them just to go, look, this is too much, mate, bye. And they never did that. So
I mean, it's bad enough for us just arriving at Kathmandu airport with a group of 16 people to go on a trek to try and get a visa for them. So God knows what it must have been like for you going into all those countries with all those visas you needed.
Yeah, and sometimes when it happens, we had it frequently where visas were refused, and you think, well, that can't be the final chapter of that story. We have to work out a way to get in. And I was days away from entering some countries without visas, and explicit letters from the governments explaining I cannot go. And we had to find a way and people to work a way in which I could enter a country legally. And obviously there was conversations about, do we go in illegally? Unfortunately, I think the answer, personally, as honest as this is, and maybe it serves me in a bad light, but I would have gone through anything to get it done. Fortunately, it didn't come to that. But Syria, as a classic example, it took 24 different people with different connections just to work out those logistics of getting me in and out safely, and to run a marathon, obviously. So, yeah, there was many aspects to it. Let's put it that way.
So out of the 196 marathons that you actually did, obviously some of those were organised marathons where you received a medal at the end of it, and there were others that you just ran the 26.2 miles in the country. What was the percentage difference between sort of organised marathons to sort of just going for a 26.2 mile run in the country?
Very difficult to answer that because, well, number one, I set off purposely not to run, basically try and run as few as possible major official marathons, because I'd already done hundreds of them and they were just money-making machines, and I wanted to have an authentic experience in a country. So, for example, France is a classic example. I ran all over France before. I'd done various marathons in Paris. I had no want to go and run Paris Marathon, and so I chose to run in Nice instead. But then as the trip progressed, people were getting wind of what I was doing, and we were contacting running clubs and ministers of sport in various countries and presidents and governments and embassies. And they then started to organize races in anticipation for me to arrive. And so races would spring up and I'd have fancy banners with my face all over them and medals with my face on and engraved in them and beautiful like trophies. And I'd be having these huge conferences with multiple TV stations in these places. And it was just phenomenal. The support just snowballed. And so what was supposed to be me just kind of turning and trotting up, and I wanted everybody to get involved. I just hadn't realized quite how many people would get involved. And so I would say by halfway, I was running with people with a start finish line most of the time. And so that became more than I could have ever hoped for. It was better than an official organized race because it was organized for me. And I could see the best bits. They would say, well, where do you want to go? Like 3 months before I arrive, and they would organize a route and get everything set up for me and then have all of the aid stations. And it was brilliant. Don't get me wrong. Many of the countries I had where I had to do it either solo or with a couple of runners that were there. I ran with Paralympians, I ran with presidents. And they were much more lower key. You know, some cases we were running with presidents with their armored vehicles behind and ahead of us. It was just surreal. The whole thing it just exploded.
So out of all of the countries then, if you could have to pick three that kind of made the trip for you, which would be the top three countries that you actually ran in?
Oh, very top three. That's better than just the top one, because that's almost impossible. I think Sierra Leone stands out as a big one. Sierra Leone famously being an incredibly poor country, but I think one of the friendliest, most welcoming nations I've ever experienced. And it helps that a friend of mine was a doctor in Freetown in a children's hospital, and I got to see real life Sierra Leone as well as beautiful McKinney beaches. And it's a very unique experience. You know, you get off a plane and your bag goes one way on a boat, and you get on another boat and you end up, it's all just surreal. But it's also a beautiful country. So I think that stands out as one. Next I'd say is Guatemala. Ran in a place called Antigua. Guatemala is beautiful. I happened to be running when one of the volcanoes was erupting, Mount Fuego, and that volcano was erupting so badly that 3 weeks after I left, it erupted so much that it actually destroyed some of the villages underneath. But that was special to be running around a volcano. I then met people during that trip that I'm now friends with and have since ran with me in every other continent. And in fact, are now trustees on some of my foundations that we've set up. So that was a great one for community and network and experience. And I think I'm going to have to say Kiribati, one of the Pacific islands, tiny island, very few people visit it. It's just a tiny, tiny bit of land, very small. Like if you're thinking small, think smaller. And
how many times did you have to run around it then to get the marathon in?
It was very, very narrow. So we did, I think it was 3 up and back. So it's not that small, but small enough that you're in a piece of land as wide as a road, and that's it. And you've got some trees. The airport's at one end, and then you have a couple of people that sell some fish for dinner, and maybe some fishing boats that go out and collect that fish. And other than that, maybe you've got one shop. It was the most beautiful place, crystal clear water in turquoise and classic tropical beach. So that was quite special. And I met a lovely father-daughter combo there who were British, and they were actually living and traveling around the world with work, and they have done since she was 12, I think, for 4 years. We're great friends with them now. They now live in Georgia, Tbilisi, and again, it was just the most remarkable. I had my birthday there as well, which was special. So that was nice.
How many times did you return back to the UK during the challenge itself?
I think I'm going to say 6 off the top of my head. Yeah, we had 8 phases, and I think I came out 6 times, and they were for about 24 hours or 48 hours, and that was to switch a passport over. Might have only been 5 times actually, because I had some friends that would bring a passport out to me and swap that over. It was just a case of having to make sure that one passport was being handled with all of the various embassies to get the next batch of stamps for the next batch of countries, and then I would switch those over and then take one that was full and ready, because obviously the visas are unhelpfully not valid for very long, and therefore you've got to get the timing quite right, as I'm sure you know. So so I think it was a few times, but it didn't really feel like I was coming home, because I often just stayed at the airport, and I was often just we had lots of media to do, and before I knew it, it was time to go again. So it didn't really feel like I was exiting airside, even though I was. It was very weird, and collecting gear and stuff like that. I was so wishing for fresh clothes, and all my white clothes that were pristine at the beginning kind of just turned sweaty yellow and sun cream stained and stuff. So it was nice to get a fresh batch of clothes every now and then.
I mean, that was one of my favourite parts in the book. Actually, was at the back where you've got your kit list of what you actually took on the trip with you. And I'll just see if I can quickly find it. But it was, it just made me chuckle when it was like 128 gigabyte SD cards times 40.
Yeah. I think we took something like 20 terabytes of images or something. It's just ridiculous. Like bags of SD cards, and I tried to make sure that I was keeping as much data as possible, and like backing it up everywhere and sending it and uploading it to the cloud whenever I had Wi-Fi. And that was such a good, because we were filming for a documentary, and so I had to make sure I was filming in the right format, in the right quality, and that we didn't, just have a massive chunk of 6 months where we didn't have any, film. And so there was an extra pressure there as well.
Because didn't you, in the book, it says that, you actually had a load of camera kit nicked at one point going through going through the airport as well, that you thought someone had opened your bag and taken it out.
Yeah, that was in China. That was Chinese officials that did that. That I have no idea why. I've been through the airport before, transitioned 3 or 4 times. And yeah, I don't know why that happened. I actually had some of my stuff stolen more than once, kind of getting stuff back from it being lost and then putting it back in my bag and then it going again. And I had to, because we were traveling with stuff like a drone and things to get footage, that was confiscated more times.
How many times with that? But yeah.
Just endless. And often it was just, you can't go in the country with that. And they would just put it on a shelf and look at me as if to say, come back. And it was just sit there.
Was that Peru by any chance? Because Peru are really bad with that.
Actually, I don't think I know. I don't think Peru, classic, isn't it? It's classic travel. It's never consistent.
Yeah.
I think Peru was fine, actually.
Morocco's the one for us. Where you don't take a drone into Morocco. They're really bad in Morocco with drones.
North Korea was mine. North Korea was a big no-no. And Turkmenistan. There was another one that was Cuba. That was another.
Okay.
Another big one. That was a hassle. I can't remember any more off the top of my head, but especially North Korea, obviously, for obvious reasons.
Which was the one country that caused you the most issues? Is there one you thought, we're not going to get this one done?
Oh, yes. That's a good point. Okay, yeah, let's think about that then. I mean, I'm thinking of the countries that had loads of issues while I was there, but actually issues just getting in, or maybe not getting it done in time. I would say Syria and Yemen, and actually Iran. No, I'm going to top it with Iran. Iran was so difficult. I had visas refused. There was the logistics of passports and the right stamps and all that sort of stuff, things like Israel-Iran relations and all that sort of stuff. And I've ended up not knowing if we were going to be able to go into Iran literally hours before we flew. I flew to Iran. And I was only given 12 hours, I believe. Might have been a bit more than that. I think it was about 12 hours that I was given in the country, and then I had to be out. And I witnessed a horrible beating of a person there by government officials. So Iran was scary. And I ended up running that Iran marathon without any water for 24 miles in like 40-degree heat. Yeah, not ideal.
So not one that you want to go back and repeat then?
No, thank you.
When you talk to people about the challenge, is there one story from the trip that actually always comes out as your favorite story that you tell everyone?
That's a good question. Favorite story? I think the one that comes out most of the time is when I was mugged at knife point and at gunpoint in Nigeria. That was very horrible in Lagos Market. I'm just trying to think of the other. A great one actually is cheetah. I came to very, very close, too close to a cheetah in Namibia. I went out. This was the day after my marathon, and I had a rare day off, and I wanted to go and see some big cats. And I went out into the wild. I hired this guy. He knew what he was doing. Had a gun over his shoulder. He told me, "You go that way. I'll go this way." And it turns out that when he said, "Oh yeah, if you see any animals, just shout," that was a rather foolish thing to kind of accept him saying to me. It was just him and I in the middle of nowhere. He was nowhere to be seen. And he said to me as I left him, he said, "Just be careful of snakes." And all that time, all I was thinking I was going to see was snakes, because he said, "Just be careful of snakes." And I thought it was a bit of a con. I'm never going to see a cheetah. And I think he thought the same, actually, looking back. And it turns out that I was meters away from a cheetah, and I've got a brilliant video of the cheetah looking at me, turning, getting into a kind of a pounce position, and then standing up again and walking straight past me and literally brushing past my legs. So that was a story that I'm amazed that I got it on video, because I was scared, put it that way. Yeah. I froze for a long time, and I thought, well, if I'm gonna go out, I might as well film this. And that was scary, but I think that's probably one of my favorites.
What was your last country to finish on? Where did you decide to finish the challenge, and why did you decide to finish it there?
Well, I don't think we really had any alternative. It had to be Athens, the home of marathon. Running from Marathon to Athens, the famous birthplace of the distance. And it happened to be roughly when we needed it to be. It was November the 10th, which was long enough, more or less, at a bit of a push to get us all around to every country within 674 days, about 23 months. And so, we finished November the 10th in Athens from Marathon. And I was fortunately accompanied by not only people I'd met from all over the world, but Kevin, my inspiration, who was supposed to have died by his prognosis 4 years prior. And he was still there 6 years after. I think it was 5 years and 4 days or something after his diagnosis. He's now in his 6th year. And he was there, and he ran the final marathon with me, which was just the icing on the cake of an extraordinary adventure. You can't, if you're going to do a running challenge, it's got to be Athens to finish.
Yeah, completely. So how much did you started off with an ambition to raise £250,000 for prostate cancer? What was the final total in the end, or is it still going now?
Well, it's still going. I think we're probably over 250 now. I would say with 80% confidence we're over 250 now. It's difficult to say because the Just Giving page is live, but it's not promoted anymore. And I get lots of lovely emails from people and organizations actually who've given me big chunks of donations to the charity, but they've sent checks directly. So it's quite difficult to give you a real figure. I think we're over 200,000 or something, including online and offline donations with Just Giving. But I think with the extras that we've had come in and are still coming in thanks to the book. So I'm very pleased with that. I wish we could put a zero on the end and make a massive difference for prostate cancer, but we're doing stuff in the future, and so let's see what we can do.
What was the one piece of kit that you took with you that you're glad you took with you?
Other than my trainers, they were quite important. I would say my international extension cable. As boring as that sounds, you know as well as I do, there's nothing worse than being in a room with a plug socket that you can't fit anything in because it's at the wrong angle or next to a table or in the corner of a room, which I've had. And I was so dependent on, I ran with 2 watches. Obviously, I had all my camera gear to charge, my drone, laptop, iPad, phone, and my GPS tracker, my sat phone. Everything had to be charged all the time. And there was plenty of places, including airports, that just didn't have any form of charging anywhere. And so my extension cable was my kind of go-to. And amazingly, it made it around the world without being confiscated or lost or stolen or broken. And I relied on that when I was, in a hostel or something, or a tiny little room somewhere. I would leave my extension cable with all of my devices on, plugged in and charged up. So not very environmentally friendly, but completely mandatory for the success of the trip.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good tip for any adventure traveler, really, that normally you're sharing a room with somebody else. There's one plug socket in there, and you're just about to set off the night before your trek, and suddenly you realize you need to charge your phone, your camera, your head torch. Everything needs suddenly charging. So actually that's a really good tip. That I think that's one to take away, that an extension cable that does USB as well, because that's the other thing. Everyone seems to charge via USB now.
You saw my bags. It was really, I was just a spaghetti I had this extension cable with multiple USB adapters out of it, and all sorts of world adapters so I could go into any plugs. It worked everywhere, and it was probably by fluke more than anything, but I'm proud of that.
So what is next then for Nick Butter?
I'm going to have a very long sleep. No, I've had my sleep. I got off that trip in November of 19. Then 2020 was writing the book, and Running the World is now out and doing well. But we've got the documentary coming out later this year, which will be brilliant. And I'm quite looking forward to kind of finishing that chapter. And then the last piece of the puzzle regarding running the world is the photography book, which I'm really enjoying finishing off now. Photos from all over the world and photos I've taken that I kind of tell a good story. So it kind of accompanies the book as well, the written book. In terms of expeditions, we have 4 expeditions this year. And then we're in training for something I've been planning. We're even planning this right back when I was in the middle of running the world. That's how much we were trying to overlap and think of the future, because there's so much to do. So I'm actually planning a journey and another couple of world records, which will probably be the biggest thing I will attempt. I say probably, it definitely will be the biggest thing I'll ever attempt in 2023. I can't really tell you what it is yet because I'm sworn to secrecy, but it is going to be a lot of miles of adventure and the big in the endurance world that I will ever do. In between that time, we've got a speaking tour at the end of this year, so all over the UK and rest of the world. 90 days, theatres, schools, businesses, bookshops, just chatting about my journey and hopefully inspiring some kids along the way. And our 4 trips we've got this year, which I'm really excited for. A couple of them are world records, a couple of them are firsts. We're doing north to south of New Zealand. We're doing circumnavigation of Iceland, north to south of Malawi, which I'm really looking forward to because there's going to be some real cool projects that we're doing with some environmental causes there and some mosquito nets and malaria meds and water projects. That's going to be great. And then the final kind of hurrah for the year before the speaking tour is a really intensive run around the circumnavigation of Bali. So that's going to be beautiful, a lot more fun, a lot less grueling, but decent mileage. And we'll have some of me and my team come with me for that one and enjoy that one. So it's going to be a busy year. We have planned everything. We are ready to go. And no doubt COVID is probably going to take everything from under us.
But certainly is.
Exactly. It's kind of all we can do. You know, we've got everything planned and we have alternatives if they don't go ahead because of COVID. But I'm a big believer in planning it. And if you don't plan it, then you can't do it, can you? So
no, exactly. You can always move a plan, can't you? But if it's never planned, then actually it's never going to happen, is it?
Exactly.
So obviously, you know, we run at the Bucket List Company. We run bucket list trips around the world. Your standard bucket list trips, some of them. What is on your bucket list?
Well, the things that I'd like to do more that I can talk about. And the one that comes to my mind I can't talk about, which is frustrating. Obviously, it's a running trip, but a good few things on my bucket list, and I do have a list. It's actually a handwritten list that I've had for a long time, and I make a very, very strict rule of if I write it down on this list, it happens. And so I've got a couple of things on there which are quite big and going to be quite fun. So I want to do both the poles. I want to trek to both the poles, and I'd love to do one or two oceans, maybe rowing in the fullness of time. So a couple of water-bound and a couple of polar-bound journeys. But there's also some smaller things like doing the Faroe Islands and spending a bit more time in Tibet, and some journeys in the Yukon. So hopefully that will work.
Amazing. So before we finish up, where can people find out about you? Where can they buy the book? Where can they find out about the speaker tour? Where are you on Instagram? Give us all the details.
Yeah, thank you very much. So Instagram, it is Nick Butter Run. And on there, you can pretty much see all of the daily updates and where we are and what we're up to. Apart from that, we have the website, which is nickbutter.com. And that has everything from my 196 Foundation, which is my non-profit. We're launching a magazine soon and an adventure grant. So that's all on there. And the book on Amazon, bookshop.org, Waterstones, pretty much anywhere. That's called Running the World. And the documentary will be out later on Netflix. And what else is there to say? I suppose my contact details are on there on the website. So you can email me or WhatsApp me if you want to get involved in a running challenge or just have some advice. I do lots of kind of coaching with people. So I'm not to say I'm an expert, but I've done a few miles. So I can give some tips if it's needed. But yeah, if anybody wants to get in touch, I'm kind of a person of like to have great people around me. So if you fancy getting involved, volunteering your time or simply coming and sharing some footsteps with me somewhere, then more than willing to get everybody in touch. Thank you.
Nick Butter, it's been a pleasure. Thanks ever so much for coming on. Keep running, and we hope to hear from you soon. Maybe you come and do another podcast when you've done the next challenge.
Yeah, no, and I'd like to offer my volunteering. If you need anybody to come and help with any trips that you're working on, or just do some heavy lifting with gear or somewhere, or need some help with any visa access, then I'd honestly like to get involved with anything like that. I think what you're doing is amazing, and it looks like a lot of people are going to be experiencing a lot of great memories through what you offer. So good job.
Well, we'll definitely take you up on that. So maybe we'll get Nick on one of the trips, and you could be trekking with Nick on one of our trips very soon then. Nick, thanks ever so much. It's been a pleasure. I hope you've found it really interesting hearing about Nick's challenges, and we look forward to speaking to you soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.